Emmanuel Wa-Kyendo, and today's question in economics: what could a Chinese citizen have asked the Kenyan president and his large retinue when they visited Beijing and China in general on the week of 21st April 2025? Now, in the week of 21st April 2025, Kenya's executive made a visit to China, ostensibly to search for solutions for Kenya's narrowing fiscal space and to embark on a new round of the deepening of economic and political relations between the two countries. Unbeknownst to many Kenyans, since its independence in 1963, Kenya was a comparatively wealthier country than China, measured by the average income per citizen. So while it was still a very poor nation, Kenya's lead in income, Kenya led China in income per capita up until as recently as the year 1991. What follows is an exploration of the currents underlying this interesting context. Now, the chart we have before us illustrates Kenya and China's per capita income between the years 1961 and 1994 in 2015 US dollar terms. The green line represents Kenya, the blue line, China. Where did Kenya fall behind? On 12 December 1963, Kenya gained its independence from the United Kingdom. In that year, Kenya's per capita income was 107 US dollars, while China's per capita income was $74.3. Now, we might actually wonder what the world's per capita was. Let me have a quick look and just see how wealthy the rest of the world was on average. Now, we'll let that load and continue. At Kenya's independence, the average Kenyan was wealthier than the average Chinese citizen. This held true from the 1960s onwards until the year 1991. In the year 1991, Kenya's per capita income was $344 American, while China's per capita income was $333 American, confirming that both countries had very poor citizens. By the year 1991, Kenya's per capita income was $336, while China's was $366. It was in this year that China's per capita income overtook Kenya's. In the year 2025, the year for which this data was collected, the World Bank used the year 2015 as a base year for which US dollar values for indicators like per capita GDP were generated. Now, in the year 1963, Kenya's population was 8.6 million, while China's was 665 million. In the year 1991, Kenya's population was 23.6 million, while China's was already a colossal, whooping 1.15 billion. In the year 1963, Kenya's manufacturing share of GDP was 9%. In the year 2004, Kenya's manufacturing share of GDP was 10%. Now, what does that actually mean? Manufacturing is important because of how it contributes to growth. This means that Kenya's share of manufacturing activity remained the same. It's the economics equivalent of a most embarrassing stagnation. You didn't move. In the year 2004, Kenya's manufacturing share of GDP was 10%. Now, in that year, China's manufacturing share of GDP was 32%. In assessing the structure of an economy, it has been observed that an economy must sustain growth rates of 10% and beyond for at least one generation in order to trigger the structural transformation that is characterized by a movement of labor and entrepreneurship activities from agricultural centered activities to manufacturing and then onwards to high value service activities. Furthermore, it has been observed throughout human history that it is manufacturing activities that drive economic transformation. That is, historically, poverty, not wealth, has been the typical human experience. No other set of activities have been more responsible for generating wealth and raising many from poverty than manufacturing. This process of structural transformation usually hits a tipping point when the manufacturing share of GDP exceeds 15%. Now remember, Kenya stayed at 10% for has stayed at 10% almost since its independence, while China moved from those low levels of manufacturing activities all the way up to 25%, right? And that this is basically saying that you want to stop just using simple tools, farming, digging up the soil. You want to move on to using machines. Then you want to move on to extracting the crop and putting it in a factory. Then you want to move on right, you're adding value to that crop. Maybe you're squeezing the juices out of these crops, mixing them, using chemical science to make something new that was not there before. And maybe you move even further because now you're processing iron and other metals, and you're making more and more complex products. You're making more things that no one else can make. So, although the World Bank does not present data on China's manufacturing share of GDP prior to the year 2004, it is clear that while China had undergone significant structural transformation, Kenya had not. In sum, Kenya's regressive fiscal and monetary policies, its excessively defensive trade policies, and its repressive regimes served to generate unstable macroeconomic conditions and in this way suppressed economic growth and allowed a nation like China, whose institutions had the challenge of carrying out administrative duties over many more millions of people, and engage in the very same complex world in which Kenya lives, to undertake reforms whose effects led to average incomes overtaking Kenya. In July 1971, Henry Kissinger made a trip to China. Now, Henry Kissinger at the time was a high-level diplomat with close ties to multiple American administrations, a lot of connections around the world, allowing him to carry out all forms of very creative shuttle diplomacy. He helped engineer a rapprochement, a coming together in peace between China and the United States, two countries that had been divided by a communist split. On February 21st, or between February 21st and February 28th, 1972, American President Richard Nixon visited China on a visit that launched what would become the economic integration between China or Chinese and American markets. China's top administrator, Mao Zedong, passed away on the 9th September 1976. The Chinese reform and opening up policy that was implemented in the year 1978 would follow the passing of Mao Zedong and was carried out under the leadership of one Deng Xiaoping. On December 11th, 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization. Now, between all these events, the Chinese private sector and decisions by state policy and state policy makers helped drive a structural transformation so explosive that the World Bank estimates that it raised about 800 million people out of poverty. The scale of China's accomplishments is, by all measures, a colossal feat. So then China turns around and asks Kenya, how did you fall so far behind? Kenyan and African officials have been known to take trips abroad to benchmark against top institutional and economic performers and bring back knowledge to help develop their own countries. From the point of view of the African and the Kenyan citizen, these trips are mere jamborees designed to extract ever greater sums from the national budget in the form of per diems at the minimum, right? What's more, citizens suspect, and not without reason, that some of these trips are embarked upon for self-serving deal making. In other words, there is very little learning that takes place. In the week of 21st April 2025, Kenya's president and an official entourage paid a visit to China. That executive leading this trip is likely to frame the trip as another exercise in, say, learning development and securing promises for investment, presiding over an administration that has not only lifted many millions from poverty, but that has overtaken its erstwhile older brother Kenya. It is more than proper that Xi Jinping turn the tables on the benchmarking Africans and ask the Kenyan president exactly how it is that over the last 30 years, successive Kenyan governments have managed to push Kenya to fall so far behind and that have served to destroy Kenyan welfare. That an exasperated Vietnamese energy executive cast aspersions on the very African administrative expression of a tragic doublespeak, right? Aspersions that quickly went viral after paying Kenya a visit the same week of 21st April 2025 only serves to bring to relief the shock and shame that the elementary failures of policymakers on the African continent must continuously generate. Now, that is in reference to a story whereby a Vietnamese energy executive visited Kenya on that very same week, and after a series of meetings was appalled and said, look, they have all kinds of fancy talk, all kinds of fancy PR, and all kinds of declarations, but they do nothing for their own people. They claim they will give them the world, but don't even hand over a crumb. My name is Emmanuel Wa-Kyendo. I've been your friend. Economics questions. Today we're asking, how did China overtake Kenya? Thank you.